Welcome, everyone, to the third Wednesday session here at the Mars Innovation Forum. I'm Matt Kaplan, the host of Planetary Radio, the public radio series and podcast from Planetary Society. I hope you've been enjoying the great discussion so far. I believe we've got yet another great one. It's not going to disappoint. You won't miss a common theme in at least three of the presentations that you're about to enjoy. I'll summarize it. Life doesn't just find a way. Life will enable us to become true explorers and citizens of the solar system. That's my reading of it as I learned more about the panelists that you're about to meet. And we'll start with someone who helps NASA develop and manage a broad variety of technologies that are going to be essential as we leave our pale blue dot, whether they're alive or not. John Vickers concurrently serves as a principal technologist for the Space Technology Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters and in the senior leader position for advanced and in-space manufacturing at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. He is the manager of the NASA National Center for Advanced Manufacturing and represents NASA, serving as the representative to the National Science and Technology Council's Subcommittee on Advanced Manufacturing. John, welcome, and I'm glad that you'll be getting us started here. Each of you, our four panelists, is going to deliver a roughly 5-minute presentation, and then we're going to save some time at the end for general discussion among the five of us you see on your screen. And then we will be going to your questions. So be thinking about those, and you'll be able to submit those, and we will handle those in the last 10 or 15 minutes of the time that we have together today in this session at the Mars Innovation Forum. John, it's all yours.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for having me. I'm glad we can get together today to talk about building and creating on Mars, certainly one of my favorite topics. I just have one opening remark, and that's at NASA, we don't do this alone. We partner with industry, academia, other government agencies, and others that provide people, expertise, and other critical capabilities that we need to be collectively successful and to bring new ideas to the table and to help make the business of space exploration more innovative and more efficient. Now, I'm told I only have 5 minutes, so I'll try to make 5 quick points, and I only have one chart before we get to our discussion. So next slide, please. So about the title on my slide, the Fifth Industrial Revolution. We're currently early in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So why am I talking about the fifth? And the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is the digital transformation, I believe will be the most transformative and far-reaching yet. And I do some work in this area, so it's another favorite topic. But it's my contention that industrial revolutions are generational and very big jumps forward. So I guess the prediction of the next one is a bit of a gamble, but it's my belief that in-space manufacturing and the expanding space economy will be the focus of the fifth industrial revolution, although there's several sub-drivers to that. But that's a topic for another day, although I'll try to touch on some of them in the discussion if I get a chance. Now, when I say in-space manufacturing, excavation, and construction technologies are evolving rapidly and bit by bit towards that sustainable path to Mars, I really mean that I think we have a robust portfolio of demonstrations today, and I'll talk about some of those, and planned, and I'll talk about some of those. Now, when I say bit by bit, I don't mean slow. Somebody thinks I mean slow, but rather I mean it's an assertive, I'll say, step by step or phase by phase process, and that's what the graphics on the chart are meant to illustrate. Now, I'll stick mostly to the Space Technology Mission Directorate at NASA, their portfolio, because that's where I work, and the approach that STMD, sorry if I use that acronym, but STMD has spans a range of discipline areas and technology readiness levels to advance technologies for the benefit of NASA, other national priority needs and commercial space. Now, from my vantage point, that starts with material science that we're doing on the International Space Station. And so you see the graphic. The work that we're doing there today balances fundamental and application-driven research. And there's almost always an element of materials processing because ultimately we do want to build something. So I count that within the in-space manufacturing portfolio. That's my portfolio. Now, we've been doing that work on ISS for approximately 20 years. Now, we launched the first 3D printer together with the Made in Space company in 2014, and that's when things changed. The photo on the lower left is of astronaut Butch Wilmore with one of the first 3D printed parts. Now, it's not that we hadn't pursued in-space manufacturing before, but I think that this was a revelation that made known that much, much more was possible. So we're still pursuing many projects aboard the ISS as a demonstration platform, and we'll continue to do that because it's an ideal demo platform as a stepping stone to the moon and Mars. In fact, I believe one of our top priorities for the lunar surface should be a similar research laboratory capable to perform materials and manufacturing research, my topic, but of course other areas too. Now today we have two much larger demonstrations in progress that I'll mention. The OSAM-1 spacecraft that will include a payload called Spider that will manufacture a 10-meter lightweight composite beam using a technology by the Tethers Unlimited company. And then our OSAM-2 spacecraft from the Made in Space company that will 3D print two beams that extend also approximately 10 meters from each side of the spacecraft, and at the same time unfurl solar arrays. And those solar arrays will be able to generate up to 5 times more power than traditional solar panels on similar spacecraft. Both of those platforms should launch in the next couple of years. Now, NASA isn't alone in its in-space manufacturing goals, and I've included a DARPA graphic about their NOMAD program for orbital construction and manufacturing in space, and we're working with them, but I better leave it at that and allow you to read more about that online. Now, we're also working to advance 3D printed construction systems for the moon and Mars, and the process of building landing pads, habitats, and roads on the moon or Mars will look very different than the common construction sites that you see on Earth. Now, NASA is currently partnering, led by a project out of the Marshall Space Flight Center, with industry, government, and academia in a very substantial Moon to Mars Planetary Autonomous Construction Technologies effort called IMPACT. Now, the IMPACT project will test lunar soil simulants with various processing and printing technologies, but that's really a big understatement for what we expect them to accomplish. Now, so for all of our technology capability areas, what we want to do is increase the technology readiness level and test systems in a relevant environment to prove it would be feasible to develop larger scale capability as suitable infrastructure on the moon and Mars. Now, I think my time is probably up. I want to say thanks again. I'll give it back to Matt and the team, and I look forward to answering some questions from the chat.
Thank you, John. It is so unfair, really, to you and to all the other panelists who have such exciting stuff to talk to us about, to say that you've got 5 minutes, 5 or 6. So I hope that this is something that people will explore further on their own. What an amazing array of technologies you showed in that single slide. There is a concept, because I think it will also apply and be useful for the presentations we're about to hear from your 3 colleagues there. And it's one that probably most of our audience is aware of. But could you talk a little bit about technology readiness levels, TRL, and how important this is for evaluating new technologies like the ones you were just showing us?
You bet. I'll be glad to. And we use the term TRL. We mean technology readiness levels, and that's about the maturity of the technology. And so we want to watch the maturity increase as we fun projects and watch the technologies advance. And it's basically a 10-stage system. So there's 10 levels of technology readiness levels. And I'll just group the first 3 into research, but we want to see that research progress between stage 1, and stage 1 is really very basic fundamental research. So I'll say the first phase is TRL 1 to 3, and then we look at the TRLs 4 to 6, and that's really the development phase. So it's come out of the laboratory, and in the TRL 6 phase, we want to demonstrate something through test or sometimes even flight, but we want to put that technology into a relevant environment. And then we move into the phase that's 7 to 10. And when you get into a 7 to 10, you begin to demonstrate it in the actual environment, not just the relevant environment, but the actual environment, such as a flight demonstration.
So I'm thinking like an experiment like MOXIE on Perseverance, which is now producing oxygen. That would be up there toward the top of the scale, I assume.
That's right. And these scales are a little objective, but some would say now that because MOXIE's been demonstrated in the actual environment, that it's a TRL 9.
Great. John, that's a terrific introduction, not only to the technologies you directly deal with, but to the other presentations that we're about to hear. And so we're going to go to the second of those right now, and it's going to come to us from Steve Bailey. Steve is chief engineer for Redwyrm and a founder of Deep Space Systems, which merged with ATCOL about a year ago to form Redwyrm. If you name a mission of exploration across the solar system, it's likely Redwyrm was part of it, including at least 6 that have gone to the red planet. So Stephen has paid his dues at the Johnson Space Center, JPL, Lockheed Martin, and others, working on systems ranging from Mars Pathfinder to the Orion capsule, which we're all looking forward to seeing go on that Artemis 1 mission, hopefully before the end of this year. Steve, welcome, and you can head into your presentation.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to show you some work that's done by one of our brilliant employees, Heather Hava, who led an all-women engineering team in this innovative concept, award-winning concept. It wasn't a no boys allowed thing. It just happened to be all women, which I think is terrific. What I'll show you is a Mars habitat for 4 crew members with nearly complete loop closure around bioregenerative technology. So first, I wanted to introduce Redwyrm. I'm the chief engineer. You've never heard of Redwyrm, probably. It's a new company that's really formed out of a collection of some high heritage aerospace companies. Made in Space was one of the ones that was talked about earlier by John. Rocor, Oakman Aerospace, ATCOL, Maryland Aerospace, Deployable Space Systems, LoadPath. All of our companies have joined forces together. We're about 500 now, and we are producing everything from the massive ROSA solar arrays you see at the lower left to microelectronics, high-performance camera systems, large space deployable systems, and as John mentioned, we're doing brand new things in space, manufacturing in space, assembly in space, using new techniques, including 3D printing of both metals and polymers and ceramics. So all of those technological innovations are things that are associated with Redwyrm companies. We're kind of a group that produces high reliability hardware on time for everyone who needs it. So this team that Heather led was all about integrating the bioregenerative life support systems for the purpose of crew health and well-being, to see how much loop closure could be obtained. The crew needs nutrition. We want Mars, a prospering society on Mars is going to need to be self-sufficient. That is going to mean that they have to feed themselves. So bioregenerative is a way to, people breathe oxygen, exhale CO2, plants breathe CO2, exhale oxygen. So it's a great symbiosis. We trying to bring those natural systems together with technological systems is really the focus of her PhD work. So atmospheric revitalization, water reclamation, waste processing, and these organic forms. This is the focus of her work. In the lower left, I wanted we have this romantic notion of going to Mars, and I think it's all terrific, but it is a very harsh environment, and it's going to be, if we want our crews and the folks that are colonizing Mars to not get there and immediately want to go home, we need to provide a really livable environment for them. And so that's just emphasizing life inside versus life outside. So these systems, to be successful for 4 crew, each crew member needs roughly 50 square meters of exposed plant area in order to kind of satisfy their food production needs. And this can't be done with just a few variety of plants. It has to be a rich variety just for maintenance of health as well as sanity. So in this, in Girona, there were 32 land crops, 4 aquatic crops, 6 freshwater seafood species, including mussels and fish of various types. The food production spanned the spectrum of leafy green plants, roots, fruits, herbs, as well as these aquatic plants and seafood, augmented by photobioreactors that are aiding in extra oxygen production. So kind of some of the essential systems that you'll see about in each one of these is an hour-long presentation in itself, the aquaponics, hydroponics, the concept of food forests and plant growth in a way that's very synergistic with adjacent plants, growth beds, and then on the recycling side, biowicks, biodigesters, and ways to augment the technological systems, the traditional closed-loop life support systems. So as we venture out, we really do need to learn to become self-sufficient, to do food production in these very foreign environments, and to bring that into the living space, and to help that this is the kind of thing that has to be done, so that astronaut farmers working in concert with robotic farmers can together be the solution for life on Mars.
Thank you, Steve. That was terrific. I could live there for a year. That looked like a very pleasant place, Biosphere 3, maybe. And I love your Martian Gothic images there as well. We're going to move on to Daniel Tompkins, and I suspect that we're going to stay roughly on this theme that Steve has established. Daniel Tompkins is the founder of Grow Mars. He is working to solve the major challenges to feeding life on Earth as well as beyond Earth. 18 years of work, study, research in environmental and agricultural science and production are behind all of this. I can highly recommend reading a great Universe Today article about his ideas for farming on the Moon and Mars that was just published last year. Daniel, I won't say anything else except welcome and tell us, what do you have to present?
Thank you very much for having me. And yes, I've had a lifelong passion for plants, plant biology, and agriculture and the environment for ever since a very young age. I think as early as I could put a seed in the ground, which I'm enjoying doing with my kids this spring. And it's been a fascinating journey through this lifelong passion, and Mars in particular stood out as really a fundamental constraint. It's, how on earth do you produce food in such an extreme environment? I am a doctor of plant medicine, which we study. It's very similar in function to a veterinarian. Trying to solve health challenges, except for instead of animals, it's for plants. So plant pathology, entomology, soil and water science, everything that really wants to eat something in an agricultural field, we try to solve those problems. So I worked in large scale controlled environment agriculture internationally, as well as a lot of Florida-based activity, including small scale organic production. So I've seen two very different ends of the spectrum. Highly intensive fruit and vegetable production at really industrial scale, and then also really diverse and organic operations. Some of the oldest ones that have been in operation in the country. And then I've also spent a significant amount of time in the lab in plant pathology studies and other studies. So I'm also the founder of Grow Mars. We started back in 2017 around a very biomimicry-based process. There's a little bit of magic behind plants that I don't think everyone always realizes, is that most of the substance of a tree or a plant you're seeing is actually quite literally and physically CO2 and water. And it's really magical, how plants have evolved to really terraform Earth, right? I mean, if you imagine, they crawled out of the oceans to then cover these areas, and they had the same resource constraints that Mars has, right? You have an atmosphere that wants to dry you out. You have to be able to pull up nutrients or essential elements from the soil and such. So really, the original terraformers were truly plants that left the ocean and ventured off onto these barren areas of Earth, if you think of it from an evolutionary standpoint. And they're in situ resource utilizers 101. They utilize the resources they have in place because they're immobile generally. So around that, we looked at how do you make these expansive, you have the ingredients, you have the base materials for what plants need, but they need that envelope. They need that skin so that they essentially don't dry out. You need that greenhouse. And we use a lot of plastics in agriculture, and it occurred to me that not all bioplastics are biodegradable. And this really stuck out to me at a conference. And I said, I wonder, what would it look like if you had an array of photobioreactors and you were processing those hydrocarbons into plastic to create more shell environment, more greenhouse environment, to grow even more plant biomass, whether it's algal-based or crop-based. And what started off as a very simple thought experiment, ballooned out into something that has potentially large implications. Instead of kind of a closed loop life support system, this is a truly expanding loop life support system. And as much as plastic, especially non-biodegradable plastic, is an Earth-based problem. In the space environment, we want a tough plastic that's going to stay around for a couple hundred years. And also, just like we've littered much of Earth, plastic is very energetically cheap to make. So it became abundantly clear, unlike other technologies where you're kind of, does it scale up? There's actually commercial endeavors around PEF plastic is one of them that are being bioderived. So there are industrial efforts to use crop residues instead of oil for producing essentially a carbon negative plastic. And around this process, it's a very low power, low mass solution. And really, it's almost opposite of most TRL scenarios where we're trying to scale it down and say, okay, we have this industrial based process. What does it look like if it's really small? On Earth, there's not many applications for it, for doing small scale plastic production besides R&D. So from a Mars terraforming kind of scenario, it's very exciting. And we just this year were we were issued a patent around this. So that was issued in January of this past year. And why make expansive areas of greenhouse for biology? Well, like I said, plants are really good at CO2 fixation and making these hydrocarbons. And in a post-oil world, in a fifth industrial revolution, how do we make all the chemical building blocks of the future? And having an expanding loop process that is enabling the production of these base feedstocks, particularly on Mars, where you have no other option essentially. On Earth, I like to call it recarbonization instead of, okay, how do we decarbonize? How do we figure out how to recarbonize these feedstocks, or permanently sequester them in these feedstocks? It's kind of a mega scale type of project. So everything that you can produce, this was a chart done by the National Renewable Energy Lab saying, if we didn't have oil, what chemicals can we not produce? And the answer is we can produce essentially all the chemicals. We just they take additional catalysts and distillation steps, but everything you can produce out of oil, you can essentially produce out of biomass feedstocks. So from a commercial standpoint, the commercial addressable market appears to be LEO. We were very excited to see NanoRax's Bishop module, and we're planning an extravehicular greenhouse in hopefully 2022 for a small demonstration. And really, we want to be leaders in food production in space, because that seems like a very commercially addressable market that, regardless of launch costs, sustaining people in space is still half of the equation. So even if you can make launch costs lower and lower and lower, it still takes hundreds of kilograms of food to sustain someone in space every year, and that's dehydrated. And there's a lot of interest from astronauts and such to have fresh food for those psychological benefits. And plants have very different requirements than humans. People and plants, they have very different needs. Atmospheric pressure needs, the constraints are very different. So having an environment that maybe a low pressure greenhouse environment that doesn't have any galactic cosmic radiation protection and such, may be okay, and have it be a separate environment. Again, plants, think about Earth, evolutionary, billions of years ago, they've gone through all kinds of hostile environments. We're a little bit more fragile than plants, and there are some fundamental limitations there that are still to be explored. So we're kind of working backwards from an idea originally based on Mars to lunar. We have a joint NASA publication for utilizing all that carbon dioxide waste, and then in LEO environment, we are looking to do a demonstration that scales equally rapidly. We didn't realize the carbon numbers, that were available on the International Space Station and a lunar mission. But we're very excited by what we can actually produce from all that waste CO2 and utilize that, particularly in the lunar environment where, we're not going to down mass that, and we're hopefully going to be able to reuse that and build with it. We are very much a keystone technology between biological life support and in-space manufacturing. And we are able to increase in size and solar capturing area and do this very passively, where we're not electrically defined. We can use all that passive solar radiation for additional CO2 sequestration. Biology being self-replicating, whether we're using algae or crops, they're not prone to volatile organic compounds and such for degradation. So it's a really exciting arena to be a part of and move forward. And thank you very much for having me.
Great stuff, Daniel. Thank you. And how thrilling to see those little cubes hanging off of that NanoRax Bishop module, airlock module up there on the ISS. And to know that could happen as soon as next year. Best of luck, best of success in making that take place up there in low Earth orbit. We're going to go now directly to our closing presenter. And I think you'll see some interesting ties here between what we've just heard from Daniel and what we'll hear from Lynn Rothschild. Lynn is a senior research scientist at NASA's Ames Research Center in California. She also represents NASA on multiple national governmental synthetic biology efforts. She is the founding co-editor of the International Journal of Astrobiology and founded the Astrobiology Science Conference. She is a 4-time NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts or NIAC Research Fellow funding recipient. That's one of my favorite NASA programs, NIAC. She is a leader in discovering how biotechnology, life itself, will help us live and work in space and on other worlds. I recommend watching her excellent TEDx talk about using living tech to support human life on Mars and elsewhere, which I think is a little bit of what we're about to hear about. Welcome, Lynn.
Thanks so much. And I debated about whether giving you a little bit of a public service warning. For those of you who might be listening to this while eating mushrooms, you may want to put them down for about 10 minutes. Spoiler alert. So humans have all sorts of needs to live. They need to be protected from severe radiation. Of course, as we've heard before, life support. They need food, medicine, waste recycling, clothing, and so on. Off planet, you also have to start worrying about oxygen levels and gravity. You need habitats, you need power, heat, and light, communication systems, transportation. And those needs don't go away as we go off planet. The problem is that we have other challenges. And as others alluded to, we have this upmass problem where launching against Earth's gravity is tied into the cost of the mission. So if you take up room on a spacecraft with something that you're bringing with you, the mass or the volume, you're not able to do other things. So this is tied into the cost. Once you get there, what you've brought better be able to be stored, it better be reliable, and it better be flexible. I always joke, Amazon.com just doesn't do overnight delivery on Mars. So you better think this out in advance. You also, of course, need power, and thus you end up with self-sustainability, the ultimate circular economy, a catchphrase that's very popular today for good reason. So the solution to these problems, I believe, is life itself. So when you stop thinking of life as just this amazing diversity as a scientist, which as an evolutionary biologist, I've spent most of my career doing, and start to think of this marvelous diversity of life as a technology in itself, there are really amazing things you can do. So some of the things you can do, and we will be doing off planet, and my lab has worked on, for example, using organisms for material production. Of course, we do that on the Earth. We make buildings out of wood. We use rubber and so on and so forth. Life does chemistry on the Earth. Why shouldn't it do chemistry beyond the Earth? And that includes petroleum products, because petroleum was ultimately made by organisms. At this point, I usually insert a picture of a glass of champagne, but for the interest of time, you just have to imagine one. Life can be used for metal extraction. Most of our bodies actually are organometallic compounds, and so you can take advantage of that. And again, this is something that we've done for NIAC and other projects. Life is the ultimate nanotechnologist, and I wish I had a half an hour just to talk about that project, but take my word for it. Life can translate digital information into physical information. We have the ability to take digital sequences of DNA or proteins and so on, and then synthesize those. So you no longer have to have a physical continuity for life. You can have this digital in between, which is really very handy for space exploration. Life generates electricity. If you are not comatose at this point, you are taking whatever chemical energy you ingested in your last meal and you're converting it to electrical energy. We can harness that. And of course, life is used to produce pharmaceuticals, food, et cetera, et cetera. Someone asked me recently with the era of COVID whether synthetic biology has just, gone by the wayside, and I was stunned in disbelief, because that's where your vaccines and everything else are coming from. So it's only becoming more and more important, this idea of life as technology. Now, for the purposes of this talk, if we now translate this to the problem of habitats off planet, we can see a solution. So during the Apollo era, we had this very much take it with you, like a turtle does. You take your habitat with you, it's entirely reliable, but you've wasted an awful lot of upmass. And you can see the Apollo habitats, as it were very tiny. I calculated that you're talking about roughly the volume of a C block cell at Alcatraz if it was 5 feet high. So these are not luxury quarters. And if you're going to have a long-term settlement, you need to have something much bigger. And so we believe there is a better way. And one of the ways you can do this, which the NIAC program is funded for us, is taking a look at a mushroom. So here is a mushroom. You're used to seeing the fruiting body. That's what you eat. But that's the fruiting body. The main part of the mushroom is composed of hair-like structures called mycelia, which are underground. And it turns out that you can take forms and fill them with everything from rice to lawn clippings and so on, and have these mycelia eat these products, bind them together. Then you do a little post-processing with heat or not, and you can end up making things that look like particle board and are very much flame retardant and so on. You can make packing materials. My students built me a stool in about 2 weeks. It's an amazing capability using mycelia as a building structure. And so I've teamed up with primarily Chris Maurer, who's an architect at Red House Studios in Cleveland, but also architects in the UK, various other people who are involved in Mars missions and so on. And we've just been awarded a phase 2 NIAC to look at this question of using mycotexture to build structures off planet. We're showing a habitat there. We focused on that in the proposal, but I believe that you could very easily make everything from chairs and tables to actually, you can make imitation leather with mycotexture. So you can go the astronaut couture route as well. And so if I have just a moment, I would like to show you a video that Chris put together and take about a minute that shows in a much better way than I can.
Shortly after an unmanned mission lands on Mars, a hermetically sealed bag is delivered that contains microbes and spores. A rover delivers carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water sourced from Mars. The form fills with air and water, and the embedded algae grow. The reaction creates oxygen and biomass to fill the form. Fungi are released, which bind with the dried algal biomass to create a strong composite. The fungi can be made to secrete enzymes and polymers that have myriad benefits.
Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Lynn. I do encourage people to take a look at your TEDx presentation. And there were many things that caught my ear there. One of them was something else I think students in your lab have done. You taught, that's the wrong term to use, but you got strawberries to make wire, electrical wire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an incredibly cool project. If you start to think about the body, we have to be incredibly good nanotechnologists. So if you're making a copolymer as a chemist and you are somewhere between 500 and 1,000 monomers and then this and that, that's good enough. If you're actually making a protein as a human and you have one amino acid off, you can end up with sickle cell anemia. So we have to be incredible nanotechnologists. And a former student of mine who's still working with me, Simon Vecchione, realized that you could actually take DNA, and if you treat that as a nanotechnology scaffold, you can embed individual atoms of silver at precise points. And so we've been able to make what we call biowires out of that. He's now gone on, just finished his PhD about a year ago, starting to build these now into three-dimensional structures. And by the way, we can also embed things like mercury, and we think that with some substituted nucleotides that we may be able to embed other sorts of metals, so cross over from biowires to biomining. So again, incredibly cool. And if you think about it, if you've got organisms being programmed to make this DNA, your nanotechnology becomes dead cheap and can be done just not even in a clean room, just in a test tube, literally in a test tube.
Absolutely fascinating. We are only a couple of minutes away
Thank you.
from going into the audience Q&A portion of the hour that we have here together as we talk about building and creating on Mars for Mars. Before we do that, John Vickers, you've been listening patiently along with me to your colleagues here. And I'm just wondering, as somebody who deals with sometimes somewhat fanciful technologies, but also the very real nitty gritty of making these things work in space. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about some of the things you've been hearing about.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. I did, I listened. This is a bunch of rock stars on this panel with such big ideas and so much synergy between, I didn't know whether I expected so much synergy between the biotech world and the in-space manufacturing world, but I saw so much. So I picked out something. I made a bunch of notes. If I looked like I was not paying attention, I was taking notes. I loved Lynn's work with it looked like a foam that filled up the habitat. And so I've got I'm in the business too of habitat. So we got to take a look at how we bridge the gap between what we're doing with more of the physical construction and what's going on with the biotech that these guys are doing. I loved every minute of it. I was eager to hear it. And so bunch of rock stars.
I think you said it very well. That's the right term, I would say. Rock stars of space. Lynn, I think you've got good reason to be talking with Daniel there, and maybe the two of you can get together, help build that structure for that Biosphere 3 that Steve has in mind at Redwyrm. Let's go ahead now. Sure, go ahead.
Well, not such a deep, dark secret. Actually, my PhD is on working with algae. So I was just fascinated with the other talks.
Let's go ahead now. We've just about hit the 45-minute mark, and that's when we want to get to the portion of this session at the Mars Innovation Forum when we can go to your questions.